Cover it up and smile. That's what Ethan said as he handed me a makeup bag the next morning, like it was a gift instead of an order. His voice was calm, too calm, the kind that only monsters and liars master. My mother's coming for lunch. Don't embarrass me. Then he kissed my forehead, the same place his fist had landed last night, and left for work whistling. I stood there, still in my robe, my skin aching where the bruises bloomed beneath the surface. The smell of his cologne lingered in the air like smoke after a fire. My reflection in the mirror didn't look like me anymore. It looked like someone who'd stopped believing in rescue. I pressed my fingers against the cracked vanity and whispered, "Enough." When Ethan first hit me, I convinced myself it was stress. The second time, I told myself it was grief. But by the third, I knew it was control. He wanted a wife who obeyed, not a woman who thought, felt, or said no. And I had finally said no to his demand that his mother move in with us, to the idea that my life was just an extension of his. That single word, no, was enough to break whatever was left of his restraint. He struck me before I even saw it coming. The room tilted, my body folded, and in the stillness that followed, I could hear only the sound of my own heartbeat and the hum of the refrigerator. When it was over, I crawled to the bathroom, pressed a towel to my lip, and watched blood drip onto the white tile. I should have called someone. But shame is a quiet prison. It convinces you no one will believe you, or worse, that you deserved it. Hours later, I did exactly what he demanded. I put on concealer, a light pink lipstick, and a smile that didn't reach my eyes. I played the role. I even served his mother lunch, nodding along as she complained about how soft modern women had become. When Ethan left for his office, I sat at the table staring at the untouched plate of food. My pulse was steady now. My fear had burned out, leaving behind something sharper, colder. I didn't cry when I packed my bag. I didn't tremble when I walked out the door. I just moved, like a survivor escaping a burning house. No hesitation, no second glance. I drove straight downtown. I knew where Ethan worked. I'd been to the Christmas parties, smiled at his colleagues, even listened to them call him the gentleman. I parked, walked into the glass building, and ignored the way the receptionist's eyes flicked from my face to the faint bruise at my temple. When I entered the conference room, Ethan froze mid-sentence. His boss was seated across the table. Papers were spread everywhere. The air smelled like expensive coffee and panic. "Amy," he choked, his face draining of color. I set my phone on the table and pressed play. The audio filled the room. His voice, raw and cruel, captured from the night before. Every threat, every slap, every order. His boss didn't look at me when he said, "Ethan, step outside." I didn't wait for him to move. I turned, walked out, and didn't look back. For the first time in years, I felt the ground under my feet. Solid, real, mine. "Don't cry. It'll smear," Amy muttered to her reflection, her tone sharp, almost mocking. Her face was a battlefield of bruises buried under concealer. The bathroom light flickered, making her look like a ghost of herself. The door burst open. Ethan walked in holding a steaming mug of coffee, as if he hadn't just destroyed her the night before. "My mother's coming for lunch. Cover it up and smile," he said casually, setting the mug down beside her. Amy didn't respond. She just stared at the sink, where a drop of foundation mixed with a drop of blood that wouldn't wash away. Shame burned her skin like acid. Ethan adjusted his cufflinks, whistling as he walked away, humming a tune that made her stomach twist. By noon, the doorbell rang. The sharp chime made her flinch. Margaret stood there, draped in pearls, her perfume so strong it stung the air. Her arms overflowed with shopping bags, her lips already curled in disapproval. "This is lunch," Margaret sneered, eyeing the table like it offended her. "No wonder my son's lost weight. In my day, women actually knew how to cook." Amy swallowed her fury, forcing a smile that hurt her cheeks. "I hope it's to your liking," she said softly, though inside her heart screamed. Lunch was torture disguised as small talk. Margaret criticized everything: the decor, the tablecloth, even the way Amy cut her food. "Such cheap silverware," she said, clinking her fork. "And dear, try not to chew so loudly. It's unladylike." Ethan sat there, nodding, pretending to be neutral while his eyes gleamed with quiet satisfaction. Not once did he defend his wife. He didn't need to. Watching her endure was entertainment enough. When the visit finally ended, Ethan tied his necktie in front of the mirror, glancing at her like she was furniture. "I'm heading out," he said. "I'll be working late. Don't leave the house. Don't answer calls. Let's avoid drama." He kissed her forehead lightly before walking out the door, the same forehead that had struck the wall less than 24 hours earlier. Amy stood still until she heard his car engine fade down the street. Then she reached for her phone, her hand trembling but steady enough to find the number she'd saved months ago under a fake name. She pressed call. "Is everything ready?" she asked quietly. A man's voice answered, calm and professional. "Everything's in place. We've been waiting for your signal." She hung up without a word. The clock ticked. Her heartbeat synced with it. For the first time, the silence in the house didn't scare her. It empowered her. Amy changed clothes, wiped away the last of her makeup, grabbed a folder full of documents from a locked drawer, and stepped outside. The autumn air hit her face like a cleansing wind. By late afternoon, Ethan was striding into his downtown office, his arrogance wrapped around him like an expensive suit. He laughed with coworkers, made a few jokes, and even boasted about the new real estate deal he was closing soon. No one could have guessed he'd spent the previous night beating his wife. "The new owner's here," the receptionist said, not looking up as he passed. Ethan frowned. "New owner? What new owner?" "Meeting's already started. Conference room B." He quickened his pace, confusion shadowing his face. How had there been a change in ownership without his knowledge? His company wasn't small. Nothing like this should have happened without a memo. He shoved open the door to the conference room and froze. Amy was sitting at the head of the table, calm, composed, dressed in charcoal gray with her hair swept back. She looked nothing like the woman he'd left broken that morning. Every executive in the room turned toward him. "Good afternoon, Mr. Caldwell," Amy said evenly. "You're late." Ethan's mouth opened, but no words came. What is this?" he stammered. Amy rose, her heels clicking against the floor, every step echoing with power. "Let me introduce myself properly," she said. "Amy Caldwell, major shareholder, and now the new CEO of this company." The board members murmured. Some exchanged knowing glances, others simply stared. Ethan's face drained of color. "You planned this." Amy smiled, not the polite, fearful smile he was used to, but a slow, deliberate one filled with control. "You taught me to stay quiet. I learned to listen. I learned to wait. But silence doesn't mean surrender, Ethan." He took a step back, his voice trembling. "You can't do this." "I already did," she replied, returning to her chair. She crossed her legs, set her folder on the table, and looked him straight in the eyes. "This meeting will proceed as planned. You may take a seat, if you can stand the view." The room went silent. Ethan's pride shattered louder than glass. For the first time in years, Amy wasn't afraid of his voice, his anger, or his shadow. She had outlasted them all. Because sometimes, the most dangerous woman in the world is the one who's been silent too long, and finally learns that her power was never his to take. Sweat trickled down Ethan's temples, but Amy remained composed, her posture flawless, her tone calm and deliberate. She didn't raise her voice, didn't gloat, didn't explain herself. She simply was, a presence that commanded the room without effort. Every executive could feel the shift in power like a storm rolling in. Some scribbled nonsense into their notepads, pretending to stay busy. Others exchanged uneasy glances, wondering what they'd just witnessed. A few, those who knew the deeper truth, sat rigid, swallowing hard, praying her gaze wouldn't land on them. Ethan slid into an empty chair near the corner, too stunned to speak. His body was there, but his mind was still stuck on the image that would haunt him for years. Amy, seated at the head of the table in his father's company, her authority unquestioned, her calm terrifying. She wasn't the woman he used to silence. She wasn't even his wife anymore. She was something else entirely. When the meeting ended, Amy gathered her papers, stood, and walked toward the door without a word. No farewell, no acknowledgement, not even a glance in Ethan's direction. Her heels clicked against the marble floor with the rhythm of certainty. It was her first time in that building as its owner, yet she moved as though she'd built every wall with her bare hands. Outside, whispers spread through the corridors faster than wildfire. "Isn't that Caldwell's wife?" "Ex-wife, I heard. She's the new CEO." "Wait, how did that happen?" "I heard she inherited everything. Maybe she was the old man's secret heir. Or his mistress." Speculation burned through every office, but Amy didn't respond. She didn't need to. Her silence spoke louder than any press release, and it made people more uneasy than open confrontation ever could. Meanwhile, Ethan drifted through the hallways like a ghost haunting his own past. The same employees who once scrambled to greet him now looked through him as if he were invisible. His nameplate still sat on the office door, but it meant nothing. The next day, when he walked into the morning meeting, his chair was already occupied by a man he didn't even recognize. "Sorry, Mr. Caldwell," the assistant said without meeting his eyes. "Miss Caldwell asked me to inform you. Your role is under review." Under review. The words hit harder than any punch. That night, he drove home on autopilot, headlights blurring into streaks of white against the rain. The house was dark except for a faint glow in the living room. Margaret was there, sitting rigid on the couch, a half-empty glass of wine in her hand. "What did you do?" she asked flatly, not looking up. "Nothing," he muttered, dropping his keys on the table. "Don't lie to me," she snapped. "I heard about the company. How on earth is she sitting in your father's chair?" Ethan's voice broke. "She's not just some woman, Mom. She's my wife. Or she was." Margaret finally turned to look at him, her face sharp as glass. "Then how did your wife end up owning everything? How could you let that happen?" He slumped onto the couch, rubbing his temples. "I don't know. She was home this morning. And now," he looked at the floor, voice cracking. "Now she's running the empire my father built. I don't even know how she pulled it off." Margaret set her glass down with a thud. "Then you'd better find out. Because if you don't take back what's ours, I will." Ethan didn't answer. There was nothing left to say. While he drowned in confusion and pride, Amy sat in her new office downtown, surrounded by piles of files, financial records, and unfamiliar faces. The room still smelled like the last man who'd occupied it. Expensive cologne and corruption. The company had been rotting for years. Nepotism. Embezzlement. Deals made behind closed doors to protect the same men who mocked her in boardrooms. Amy could sense the decay before she even opened a folder. She wasn't here for revenge anymore. She was here for reform. By the third day, 5 senior managers were gone, each one dismissed after she uncovered buried scandals, falsified reports, and sabotage against honest employees. She didn't flinch when she signed their termination letters. Her hand was steady. Her conscience was clear. When she finally addressed the remaining staff in the main hall, she didn't stand on a stage or hide behind a lectern. She stood among them. "I didn't come here to burn this place down," she said, her voice calm but cutting through the room like a blade. "I came here to rebuild it. Integrity isn't a slogan, it's survival. And from today on, survival won't belong to the corrupt. It'll belong to the people who've worked too hard for too long without being seen." The employees looked at her with something they hadn't felt in years: hope. Ethan watched her speech later that night from a phone screen, the glow lighting up his defeated expression. He wanted to be angry, but all he felt was fear. Because he finally understood, Amy wasn't the woman he'd broken. She was the woman who'd learned to use every piece he'd shattered to build herself into something indestructible. "I came to clean this place, to heal it," Amy said, her voice steady, recorded during a brief staff address. "It'll hurt at first, like setting a broken bone. But once it heals, it'll be stronger than before." The clip spread through employee group chats within hours. Some replayed it for motivation before work. Others mocked her behind closed doors. But everyone understood one thing: Amy Caldwell wasn't going anywhere. While she rebuilt the company, Ethan spiraled. He spent sleepless nights calling lawyers, accountants, and investigators, desperate to find a loophole in the inheritance that had transferred ownership to Amy. But every document came back flawless. Every signature, every date, every seal, airtight. It infuriated him. This wasn't luck or timing. It was precision. Amy hadn't acted out of anger. She had planned it. For years, quietly, methodically, she'd mapped every detail. It was like she'd built a storm, piece by piece, and waited for the exact moment to release it. Late one evening, when the city lights burned low and the air was thick with exhaust, Ethan stood outside her office building. He'd been waiting for hours. When she finally stepped out, his voice cracked through the night air. "Amy, wait. Please, I just need to talk to you." She paused but didn't turn right away. Her security guard took a step forward, but Amy raised a hand to stop him. "Go ahead," she said quietly. He stepped closer, his voice trembling. Not everything was fake. You have to believe that. Amy turned her head slightly, just enough for him to see her expression. There was no anger in her eyes, just something colder. Pity. The kind that stung worse than hate. Everything was fake, Ethan, she said softly. Every apology, every I love you. Every time you told me I was overreacting. You didn't mean to break me. But you did. Every time you made me small. He swallowed hard. I can change. I don't want you to change, she replied. I want you gone. He reached for her hand, desperate, but she stepped back, her gaze firm. You don't have permission anymore. Then she turned and walked inside, leaving him standing beneath the cold glow of the streetlight, alone with his echoing guilt. Back upstairs, Amy found a new assistant waiting outside her door. She was young, barely mid-20s, pale, with dark circles under her eyes and a nervous smile. Hi, I'm Layla, the girl said softly. Human Resources assigned me to your schedule. Amy studied her for a moment. There was something painfully familiar in her eyes, the same fear Amy used to carry like a shadow. First time in this kind of role? Layla nodded quickly. Yes, ma'am. I've worked in other places, but not for long. Why not for long? Amy asked gently. Layla looked down. Sometimes people didn't like how I asked questions. Amy didn't press. She simply said, You'll do fine here, and motioned her in. During lunch that day, Amy noticed Layla sitting alone in the corner of the cafeteria, not eating, just holding her notebook like it was armor. By late afternoon, during a presentation, Layla suddenly collapsed. Someone call for help, an employee shouted. Amy didn't wait. She rushed forward, kneeling beside the girl. Give her some space, she ordered. When no one moved fast enough, she scooped Layla's light frame into her arms and carried her down the hall to the nurse's station. When Layla regained consciousness, she whispered weakly, I'm fine. I just didn't eat. Amy offered her water, brushing a strand of hair from her forehead. You shouldn't have to collapse for someone to notice you, she said softly. No one should fall without someone there to pick them up. Layla's eyes filled with tears she didn't let spill. She nodded, clutching the cup with both trembling hands. That night, after everyone left, Amy stayed behind to review reports. Her desk was stacked with files, corruption audits, dismissed employee records, restructuring notes. But one document caught her attention. It was listed under her name, marked classified. When she tried to open it, access was denied. She requested authorization through the archives department. They told her she'd have to wait 24 hours. The request lingered in her mind as she drove home through the quiet streets. When she walked into her apartment, she froze. A single envelope sat on the kitchen table. No return address. Just her name, Amy Caldwell, written in uneven handwriting. She tore it open carefully. Inside was one piece of paper. Just one sentence, scrawled in shaky black ink. Your mother isn't dead. For a moment, everything stopped. The hum of the refrigerator, the pulse in her throat, the world itself. Amy's hands began to tremble. A chill rippled down her arms as she looked around the apartment, heart pounding, suddenly aware of how silent everything was. She reached for the blinds, peered through them into the street. Empty. But the feeling didn't fade. Someone knew something she was never meant to learn. And whoever had written that note wasn't finished. That envelope couldn't have come from anyone inside the company. It was too deliberate, too personal. Amy stared at the words again. Your mother isn't dead. The sentence sank into her like a knife she couldn't pull out. All her life, she had believed her mother died giving birth to her. The story had been told so many times, so consistently, that it had hardened into fact. Even the sisters at St. Mary's Home for Children repeated it whenever she asked. No photos, no belongings, no grave, just a sad story and a sympathetic smile. But if this letter was telling the truth, then someone had built that lie carefully. She sank onto the couch, gripping the paper like it was alive. For the first time since she'd taken control of Caldwell Enterprises, fear settled in her chest. Not fear of losing power, but of uncovering something that had been stolen from her long before she had any say in it. If her mother was alive, then someone had erased her on purpose. And when Amy thought about who might have had the power to do that, the same names circled in her mind. Ethan, Margaret, and someone else, someone she hadn't yet met, but who had clearly been waiting in the shadows. The mask of control she had built so carefully began to crack. What if everything she knew about her life, her family, her past, was a fabrication? She placed the letter back on the table as though it might burn her fingers. The words seemed to hang in the air, whispering over and over, "Your mother isn't dead." The handwriting was shaky but oddly familiar, and that detail unsettled her more than anything. Sleep never came that night. She sat on the edge of her bed, staring at the envelope as though it could move on its own. Every memory from her childhood replayed in fragments. The cold dormitory floors, the sound of church bells, the way the nuns avoided her eyes when she asked about her mother. There was always silence where truth should have been. By sunrise, she had made up her mind. Amy drove straight to Caldwell Enterprises' legal archive. As CEO, she had access to most corporate files, but some, the oldest ones, the ones with the red seals, required a board-level clearance. When she approached the archivist, an older man with gray hair and glasses that hung low on his nose, he stiffened the moment she spoke. "I need file 94, HL2, she said, keeping her tone calm. "It should be under the Bancroft records." The man hesitated. "That one sealed under a court order, Mrs. Caldwell. It can only be opened with a direct board authorization." Amy placed both hands on the counter. Her voice lowered, firm and final. "I'm the chair of the board." He held her gaze for a moment before nodding slowly and disappearing into the back room. When he returned, he carried a heavy folder wrapped in a layer of dust. "Confidential" was stamped across the front in faded red ink. Amy carried it to a nearby desk, her pulse echoing in her ears. She opened it carefully, reading line after line until she reached a smaller sealed envelope tucked inside. Without hesitation, she broke the wax seal. Inside were old papers, adoption records, legal correspondences, and a medical report. Her adoptive father, Arthur Bancroft, had signed off on an emergency custody transfer of a newborn girl from an unnamed mother under church supervision. The language was clinical, but between the lines it screamed of something darker, coercion, maybe even theft. The attached medical file made her stomach twist. It described a woman institutionalized after a severe emotional breakdown following infant separation. No name at first, just subject 241. But attached to the last page was a signature: Claire Dubois, RN, St. Jude's Medical Center. A nurse, a witness, a link to the truth. Amy closed the folder and exhaled slowly. She didn't tell anyone what she'd found, not her assistant, not the legal team, not even her closest ally in the company. Some secrets needed to be handled alone. By late afternoon, she was driving through the edge of town, where the glass buildings of the city gave way to quiet streets and modest homes. The address from the file led her to a small white house with peeling paint and a porch crowded with wind chimes. Amy stepped out, her hands trembling slightly despite the calm expression she forced on her face. She knocked once. After a long pause, the door creaked open. An older woman stood there, silver hair pulled back, deep lines etched into her face, eyes sharp despite the years. "Yes?" the woman asked cautiously. Amy swallowed, her voice barely above a whisper. "Are you Claire Dubois?" The woman's eyes flickered with something, recognition, maybe fear, before she nodded slowly. And just like that, Amy knew the letter hadn't been a lie. Claire Dubois studied Amy for several seconds before saying a single word. Her voice was quiet, but it carried a tremor that made Amy's heart tighten. "You're her, aren't you?" Amy froze. "Her who?" Claire didn't answer right away. Instead, she opened the door wider. "Come in." Inside, the air smelled faintly of camphor and old medicine. Wooden crucifixes hung on the walls beside faded photographs of children, soldiers, and wedding portraits from another lifetime. The house felt like it had been waiting, frozen in time, for this very moment. Claire motioned for Amy to sit. Her movements were slow, deliberate, like someone preparing to reopen a wound that had never really healed. "You were just a baby," Claire said finally. "The last time I saw you, they tore you from your mother's arms while she screamed your name. I still hear it sometimes at night." Amy's chest tightened. "Who did?" Claire took a shaky breath. "I don't know all their names. I was just a nurse. I was threatened, and I was paid to stay quiet." "Who threatened you?" Amy pressed, her voice breaking slightly. Claire hesitated, her eyes darting toward an old wooden dresser. After a long silence, she walked over, opened the top drawer, and took out a small yellowed envelope. "I've kept this for over 30 years, she said softly. "I told myself I should burn it, but something always stopped me. Maybe it was for you." Amy took the envelope and opened it slowly. Inside was a single photograph, a young woman with soft, dark hair holding a newborn close to her chest. The woman's eyes were swollen, her face pale, but her expression was pure love. On the back of the photo, written in pencil, was a date. Amy's breath caught in her throat. "This is my mother." Claire nodded. "Her name was Teresa. That's what she told us before they took her away. They claimed she was unstable, that she'd had a breakdown after the birth. But she wasn't crazy. She was grieving, and no one listened." Amy tucked the photo carefully into her purse. Her throat burned, but she refused to let a single tear fall. Not here. Not yet. When she stepped outside, the cold air hit her like a slap. Her hands shook as she unlocked her car. Teresa Caldwell, alive, institutionalized, silenced. And someone had made sure Amy never knew. She didn't need to wonder long about who could have done it. The name formed in her mind instantly, bitter and sharp. Margaret Caldwell. Across town, Ethan Caldwell was living his own quiet collapse. His office had been emptied after his forced resignation, and the employees who once followed his orders now avoided him entirely. Conversations went silent when he walked by. He'd become a ghost in the halls of the very company his family had once controlled. He spent his days half drunk, sleeping on the couch, replaying every moment that led to this humiliation. Calls from his lawyer went unanswered. His mother's voice, however, was unavoidable. Margaret called daily, her words sharp as glass. "You can't let that woman humiliate us, Ethan. You're a Caldwell by blood. She's a charity case, an orphan who doesn't belong in our world." He rubbed his temples, exhausted. "I don't have control anymore, Mother. You know that." "Then get it back," she snapped. "Investigate her. Find something that can destroy her before she destroys what's left of this family." He looked up at her, bitterness creeping into his voice. "Why don't you do it yourself?" Margaret's expression faltered. For a split second, he saw something behind her composure. Not anger, but fear. "There are things you don't understand," she said quietly. "Then explain them," he demanded. "Because she's winning, and for the first time, you look terrified." Margaret didn't answer. She turned and walked away, the sound of her heels echoing through the house. That night, Ethan couldn't sleep. He paced the length of the living room until dawn, the silence in the house pressing against his skull. Every noise made him jump. A branch against the window, the creak of the floorboards. At one point, standing at the window with a drink in his hand, he swore he saw Amy standing in the yard, her eyes cold, watching him through the darkness. He rushed outside, but there was no one there. Just the sound of wind moving through the trees. By morning, he looked hollow, eyes bloodshot, hands shaking, thoughts scattered. And while Ethan sank deeper into the chaos of his own making, Amy walked through the glass doors of Caldwell Enterprises with her jaw set and eyes sharper than ever. Her assistant, Layla, was already waiting in her office, clutching the day's report. Amy nodded, sliding her coat from her shoulders. "Good morning," she said evenly. Layla hesitated before replying. "Good morning, Mrs. Caldwell." Amy didn't notice the nervous tone. She was already planning her next move, one that would lead her straight into the heart of the Caldwell family's darkest secret. "Did you sleep well?" Layla asked softly, standing just inside the doorway, clutching her tablet. Amy didn't look up from the papers scattered across her desk. "No," she said simply. Layla hesitated, then took a deep breath as if gathering courage. "There's something I never told you." Amy finally looked up, her eyes calm but sharp. "I'm listening." Layla's hands trembled slightly as she spoke. "Before I started here, my life wasn't normal. I wasn't working in offices. I didn't even finish school. My mother," she paused, her voice cracking. "She sold me when I was 13. Amy froze. "I was passed from house to house," Layla continued, her words spilling out in fragments. "I was treated like I didn't matter, like I was property. I ran away when I was 16, changed my name, but," she looked down. "Sometimes I still feel like those invisible chains are there." Amy stood and walked around her desk slowly. She placed a gentle hand on Layla's arm. "You're not in that place anymore," she said firmly. "You're safe now. Here, you'll learn, grow, and no one will ever use you again." Tears welled up in Layla's eyes, but she smiled through them. "Thank you for giving me a chance." Amy's gaze softened. "I was invisible once too," she said quietly. "Now I'm visible, so others like us can be too." Hours later, As she was signing a stack of legal documents, a knock interrupted her focus. Mrs. Caldwell. It was the head of security, looking uneasy. There's a little boy outside asking for you. He says his name is Miles. Amy frowned. A child? Alone? Yes, ma'am. Says he's waiting for his mom. Amy rose immediately and followed him out. Near the building's front entrance, beside a row of planters, stood a small boy, no more than 7 years old, with tangled brown hair and wide, searching eyes. The moment he saw her, he smiled, ran forward, and threw his arms around her waist. Mommy! Amy froze. Her heart skipped a beat. She knelt down, searching his face. What did you just call me? You're my mommy, he said confidently. I see you in my dreams. My grandma said I'd find you one day. Amy's pulse quickened. Who's your grandma? The boy reached into his pocket and pulled out a crumpled piece of paper, a child's drawing. It showed a woman with long hair inside a big red heart. She told me this was you, he said proudly. She said you weren't dead. Amy turned to the guard, trying to steady her voice. Where did he come from? An older man brought him, the guard replied. Said he'd be back later. He refused to give his name. The boy hugged Amy again, pressing his cheek against her chest. His small heartbeat thudded against her ribs, steady, certain, familiar. But Amy's mind raced. Who was this child? Why did he call her mother? And why did every word he said sound like a warning wrapped in innocence? She escorted him to the reception area, where staff arranged a warm meal and called child services for guidance. Yet all through the day, Amy couldn't focus. The boy's voice, Mommy, echoed in her head like a ghost she couldn't silence. That evening, after everyone had gone home, Amy sat at her dining table, surrounded by stacks of old documents she'd pulled from the company's restricted archives. She flipped through one folder after another until a sheet slipped loose and fluttered to the floor. When she bent to pick it up, she noticed something clipped to it, an old photograph. Her breath caught in her throat. The picture showed a young woman kneeling on the ground, her face streaked with tears. In front of her stood a second woman, younger, smug, familiar, holding a baby. Amy's fingers shook as she traced the second woman's face. Even through the faded photo, she recognized it instantly. Margaret Caldwell, her mother-in-law. The woman who had tormented her, dismissed her, humiliated her, now frozen in time, clutching a child that clearly wasn't hers, while another woman reached toward them in despair. Amy's vision blurred. The world seemed to tilt. The crying woman in the photograph, it was her mother, Teresa. The room felt suddenly smaller, suffocating. Amy dropped the picture and pressed a hand to her mouth. Her stomach twisted with nausea, rage, and disbelief. So it had been Margaret all along. The theft of her life. The silencing of her mother. The creation of a lie so deep it had buried truth for decades. Amy stood slowly, the weight of years of confusion and pain crystallizing into one clear thought. The lies that bound her life were coming undone. But unraveling a lie that old comes with consequences, the kind that rip through families, destroy reputations, and burn everything built on deceit. And as Amy stared at the photograph on the floor, one truth became painfully clear. When you pull the first thread of a well-stitched lie, the whole fabric doesn't just unravel, it explodes. Amy stared at the photograph for what felt like hours, though the clock on the wall said only minutes had passed. Her face was wet with tears she hadn't even felt falling. It wasn't just a picture. It was the moment her entire life had been rewritten in front of her eyes. In that faded image, her mother was kneeling, begging, her face frozen in a plea of pure anguish. Standing above her, holding a baby with chilling ease, was Margaret Caldwell. The twisted smile on her lips said everything Amy never knew she needed to hear. That baby was her. The realization hit like an earthquake. Every story, every carefully rehearsed lie, every quiet denial, it all shattered. Amy pressed a trembling hand to her chest, trying to steady her breathing, but it felt like her lungs refused to obey. The walls of her office closed in. The silence was suffocating. Years of buried emotion surged through her. Every lonely night in that charity home. Every time she was told her mother was gone. Every moment she wondered why she'd never been wanted. Rage and grief collided inside her like a storm that had waited decades to break free. She picked up her phone and, without a second of hesitation, dialed Ethan's number. He answered on the second ring, his voice uncertain. "Amy, I need to see you," she said flatly. My office. 20 minutes. There was no explanation. No room for questions. She hung up. When Ethan walked in, the temperature in the room seemed to drop. Amy was standing behind her desk, the photo laid neatly in the center like a piece of evidence. She didn't offer him a seat, didn't greet him. Her eyes were cold, unwavering. "Does this look familiar to you?" she asked. Ethan's steps faltered as he approached. One glance at the picture, and the color drained from his face. He didn't ask what it was. He didn't even pretend not to know. His eyes dropped to the floor. "Why didn't you tell me?" Amy's voice was calm, deadly calm. "How long have you known the truth?" He swallowed hard. "Amy, answer me." His jaw tightened. "Since the beginning," he said finally, barely audible. "My mother told me before we married." Amy laughed once, cold, hollow. "Of course she did. Because to both of you, I wasn't a person. I was a project. A name to polish, a body to control. That's not true." "Then what is true, Ethan?" she asked, her voice trembling now, not with weakness, but with restrained fury. "Did you love me? Or was that just part of the lie too? You let me sit across from your mother for years, knowing what she'd done, knowing she'd taken me from my mother and built this life out of stolen blood." "I didn't know all of it," he stammered. "I only knew pieces. I found out more later, after we were married. I didn't know how to tell you." Amy's eyes glistened, but her voice stayed sharp. "You didn't tell me because you were afraid. Not of hurting me, but of losing control." He looked up, startled by the precision of her words. "You were afraid that one day I'd be more than you," she said quietly. The words landed like a blade. Ethan's shoulders sagged. There was nothing left to say. He left without another word. The sound of the door closing echoed through the office, final and heavy. That night, Amy didn't go home. She booked a room under a false name in a small hotel across town. The city lights filtered through the curtains, flickering like ghosts against the ceiling. Sleep wouldn't come. She sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the photo in her hands until her vision blurred. When she finally dozed off, her dreams were fragmented. A woman's cry, a baby being pulled away, a voice calling her name. It wasn't her own memory, but it felt like her heart remembered it anyway. Morning came gray and heavy. Amy walked into her office, her skin pale, her movements slow. She hadn't eaten, hadn't spoken to anyone. Layla stood waiting with a folder, concern etched into her young face. "Did you sleep at all?" she asked softly. Amy didn't answer. "You haven't eaten either," Layla added gently. "You're going to get sick." "I'm fine," Amy said, though her voice was distant. Layla set the folder aside and sat across from her. "You're not fine," she said, her voice trembling. "You saved me when no one even saw me. And now, you're sitting here looking like you're disappearing. I don't know how to help you." Amy finally lifted her eyes. They were red but clear, burning with something fierce and unbroken. "You're helping," she said quietly, "just by seeing me." Layla's throat tightened, but she nodded. For the first time, Amy reached across the desk and took her hand. And in that brief silence, surrounded by the ghosts of power and betrayal, something shifted. Amy wasn't the same woman who had walked into that office months ago. She was the child who had been stolen, the woman who had survived, and the force that would make sure no one ever buried another truth like hers again. "No one can help me," Amy said quietly, her voice raw. "I have to do it alone." Layla hesitated, then spoke just above a whisper. "I used to think that too, until you came along." The words didn't fix anything, but they landed softly, like the first touch of warmth after a long freeze. For a moment, Amy let herself breathe again. Maybe that was enough to move forward. Hours later, she sat in her office, the lamp's glow pooling over a stack of documents she hadn't yet finished reading. Determination replaced despair. Somewhere in those pages was the rest of her truth, the one Margaret Caldwell had buried years ago. On one of the final pages, a name appeared she hadn't noticed before. Elias Hartman, biological father. Status, missing. Amy froze. She had grown up believing she'd been abandoned by both parents. Yet here he was, hidden in plain sight. She searched every official record, every online database she could access. Nothing. He had been erased. No address, no history, no trace. Then she noticed something odd tucked between two medical reports. A handwritten note, barely legible. Seen near the West End district. Refused medical care. Possible mental instability. No further record. Amy grabbed her coat and left immediately. She didn't tell anyone where she was going. The West End was a forgotten corner of the city, cracked sidewalks, flickering streetlights, people who'd been left behind. Amy walked through alleyways and shelters, showing an old photograph she'd found in the file. Some people ignored her. Others shook their heads. Finally, a woman stirring soup at a community kitchen looked up at her and nodded toward the park across the street. "Try the bench by the fountain," she said. "Old man's there most mornings. Calls himself Elias. Talks about a daughter he lost." Amy's heart thudded. She crossed the street slowly, afraid that hope might betray her. On the bench, wrapped in old blankets, sat a thin man with a graying beard and weary eyes. He was scattering crumbs for a group of pigeons, his movements absent, almost mechanical. "Elias?" she asked gently. He didn't look up. She tried again. "Mr. Hartman?" He blinked, then spoke, his voice hoarse. "You from the courthouse?" "No," she said softly. "My name is Amy Caldwell." The man turned his head slowly. His eyes filled with tears before he could even find the words. "Amy," he whispered. "My God, my baby girl." Amy froze, her breath catching in her throat. "You know me? I searched for you," he said, his voice trembling. "All these years. Your mother, she fought so hard for you. They said she was unstable, but she wasn't. She was desperate. Where is she?" "She's alive," Amy whispered. "But she's not well. She doesn't remember much anymore." Elias' shoulders collapsed as though the weight of decades had just dropped onto him again. Amy sat down beside him, her hands shaking. For a long while, they said nothing. The silence between them wasn't awkward. It was sacred. It was the sound of two broken lives quietly finding each other again. Finally, she asked, "Why didn't anyone tell me?" His voice cracked. "Because your mother's family wanted to erase us. They said she'd disgraced them. She loved me, but I was poor. Not the kind of man they wanted around. They locked her away, took you, and left me on the streets." Tears streamed freely down Amy's cheeks. "All this time. I'm sorry," he said, clutching her hand weakly. "I couldn't protect you." Amy squeezed his hand. "You don't have to apologize. None of this was your fault." He smiled faintly, his eyes glistening. "You look just like her." Amy wiped her tears and stood. "I'm going to find her," she said with quiet conviction. "You both deserve to be seen again." The next morning, she returned to the office only long enough to retrieve the final set of records. They confirmed what she feared. Teresa Hartman, institutionalized at Willow Creek Mental Health Center. Diagnosed with dementia. No visitors. No family listed. Amy drove there herself. The facility loomed at the edge of town, gray, sterile, surrounded by chain-link fences and tired gardens. Inside, the hallways smelled of bleach and resignation. A nurse behind the counter glanced up. "Can I help you?" "I'm here to see Teresa Hartman," Amy said. "She's my mother." The nurse blinked, surprised. She's been here for years. No one's ever come for her. She has someone now." They led her down a long corridor to a small room at the end. Inside, an older woman sat in a wheelchair by the window, her white hair glowing in the afternoon light. Her eyes were dull but kind, lost in a world far away. Amy stepped closer. "Mom." The woman turned slowly, studying her face. "You're new," she said softly. "Do you work here?" "No," Amy whispered. "I'm your daughter." "I'm Amy." The woman repeated the name like she was trying to remember a dream. "Amy, what a beautiful name." Amy knelt in front of her, tears slipping down her cheeks. "I'm here now, Mom. No one's going to take us apart again. I promise." For a brief, flickering moment, something sparked behind the woman's eyes. She reached out a trembling hand and touched Amy's cheek. A smile, small and fleeting, broke through before her gaze drifted back to the window. Amy wrapped her arms around her mother and held on tightly, her tears falling into her mother's hair. Something broke inside her then, not from pain, but release. For the first time in her life, she wasn't just uncovering what had been taken from her. She was reclaiming it. Not everything was fixed. Not everything would be. But as she sat there, holding the woman who had once fought the world for her, Amy realized the truth. Healing didn't always come from answers. Sometimes, it came from finally being found. "Don't worry," Amy whispered softly, her hand trembling as she brushed a strand of white hair from her mother's face. "I'll take care of you now." And in that moment, wrapped in that fragile embrace, the roles between them shifted. The lost daughter became a protector, a mother herself, a living act of justice. The truth, Amy realized, can never stay buried. It can be disguised, silenced, twisted, but it always finds a way back. And when it does, it doesn't whisper. It stares you in the face and demands to be spoken, even if it breaks everything you thought was solid. Because from that breaking, something real can finally grow. Something that doesn't need lies to survive. When Amy left the facility that evening, the scent of her mother's perfume clung to her clothes, aged lavender and sorrow. She drove home with her chest tight and her pulse unsteady. Her hands shook, not from fear, but from the weight of her decision. She showered without turning on the light, as if she could wash off the years of deceit clinging to her skin. The water ran over her face, hot enough to sting, but she didn't flinch. She wasn't seeking comfort anymore. She wanted justice. Not in a courtroom, not through lawyers or apologies. She wanted truth laid bare, raw, public, undeniable. She wanted the world to see what Margaret Caldwell had done, to understand the rot that hid beneath her polished charity dinners and perfect family portraits. And the perfect opportunity was already waiting. The company's annual charity gala. The irony wasn't lost on her. It had been Margaret's idea. A glittering evening of cameras, live music, donors, and self-congratulation. Margaret's grand chance to reinvent herself as a woman of grace, compassion, and generosity. In the glossy invitation, she even described the event as a celebration of second chances. Her smile on the card was flawless, her message syrupy. An evening to honor those who have shaped our legacy, it read. And Amy's name, Amy Caldwell, was printed right beside hers. She accepted the invitation immediately, not to play the grateful daughter-in-law, but to end the game once and for all. Margaret would have her spotlight, and Amy would use it to burn away every mask she had ever worn. Meanwhile, Ethan Caldwell was unraveling. The demotion at the firm had been the first crack. The real collapse came later, the cold stares from employees, the whispers that followed him down every corridor. People who once feared him now pitted him, and that, to him, was worse than hatred. He started drinking heavily. The whiskey dulled the shame for a while, but it couldn't silence the voices, his mother's bitterness, Amy's absence, his own guilt gnawing at him like a parasite. He stopped sleeping in their bed, choosing the couch instead. Calls went unanswered, days blurred. Margaret scolded and pushed, demanding he take control of the family again. But Ethan had no control left, not over the business, not over Amy, not even over himself. One night, he showed up at Amy's door. She almost didn't answer, but the pounding wouldn't stop. When she opened it, she found him standing there, swaying slightly, the sharp scent of whiskey preceding him. His face was drawn and hollow. "I need to talk," he muttered, his voice low and frayed. Amy hesitated for a moment before stepping aside, not out of pity, but because she wanted to hear what the ghost of their marriage had left to say. 5 minutes, she said. He nodded, stumbling to the sofa, the same sofa that had once heard their laughter, then their silence, then their fights. "I loved you," Ethan said, his tone almost pleading. "In my own way. Everything I ever learned about love, I learned from her." Amy's eyes hardened. "Then you learned it wrong. You learned to manipulate, to control, to keep people small so they couldn't leave you." "I'm not trying to justify it," he said, rubbing his face. "I just need you to know that I did love you." She stared at him for a long moment. "You don't know what love is, Ethan. Love doesn't silence truth. It doesn't choose comfort over conscience. And it doesn't look the other way while someone next to you is breaking." "I didn't know how to protect you," he whispered, his eyes glassy. Amy's voice was calm, almost gentle. "You didn't know how? You just didn't want to. Don't confuse cowardice with inability." He lowered his head, the words striking deeper than any accusation could. After a long pause, he stood, swaying slightly toward the door. "I hope you can forgive me one day," he said quietly, "even if I wouldn't." Amy didn't reply. When the door closed behind him, she let out a long, steady breath. What she felt wasn't hatred anymore. It was something colder, emptier. The kind of indifference that comes when a wound stops bleeding because there's nothing left to give. The next morning, her phone rang. Layla's voice came through, shaking with emotion. "Amy, I think I found my son." Amy froze mid-step. "Where are you?" "Just outside town. I'll send you the address. Please come." Amy grabbed her keys and left without thinking. They drove together through quiet suburbs until they reached a modest house with white shutters and a faded porch swing. A woman answered the door. Her eyes were wary but kind. "You must be Layla," she said softly. "Come in. And please be quiet. He's still sleeping." Amy followed them inside, her pulse thrumming. Something about the air felt fragile, like one wrong move could shatter everything. And as they stepped into the dimly lit living room, Amy couldn't help but wonder, was this the beginning of healing for Layla, or just another truth about to come undone? In a small, dimly lit room with a faded rug and a few scattered toys, a 5-year-old boy sat cross-legged on the floor, drawing with broken crayons. His tiny hands moved with quiet focus, the soft scrape of color filling the silence. When Layla stepped inside, her breath caught in her throat. Her world seemed to pause. Every noise faded until all she could hear was the wild beating of her heart. She took a trembling step forward, her voice breaking as she whispered, "Miles." The boy looked up, confused for half a second. Then recognition flickered in his eyes. Without hesitation, he dropped his crayons and ran to her. Layla fell to her knees, wrapping him in her arms as if afraid he might vanish. The sound that came from her was raw and unstoppable, sobs years in the making, the kind that tear through a person and leave them changed. From the doorway, Amy stood motionless, her hand over her mouth. For a fleeting moment, she felt that something in the universe had quietly repaired itself, that a fracture long ignored had finally closed. They returned to the city together that evening, the sunset painting the skyline in gold. Amy offered Layla a full-time position in the company's social outreach department. Her mission would be to help women like herself, those who had been silenced, stripped of dignity, and left to rebuild from nothing. Layla accepted through tears, clutching Amy's hands as if she were holding onto a lifeline. That night, after Layla left, Amy stood in her kitchen under the cold white light, cutting vegetables for dinner she'd never eat. A sharp pain struck through her abdomen, stealing her breath. She gripped the counter, trembling, her vision blurring. She told herself it was exhaustion, stress, anything but what she feared. But the pain kept returning, sharper, crueler each time. A week later, she sat in a sterile examination room, her palms pressed together tightly in her lap. The doctor entered, his tone steady but heavy. "It's early-stage cancer," he said. "It hasn't spread yet, but we need to move fast." Amy nodded, her face calm, almost serene. She didn't cry, didn't ask how long she had. There was too much left unfinished. "I don't want anyone to know," she said firmly. "Not yet. You'll need support," the doctor insisted. "I will," Amy replied. "After I'm done with something first." She left the clinic with a quiet determination that scared even her. The papers stayed folded in her purse like a secret promise. No one, not Layla, not Ethan, had any idea. When the night of the company's annual benefit gala arrived, the city glittered with anticipation. The event was Margaret Caldwell's grand idea, a lavish evening of live music, fine wine, and cameras capturing every perfect angle. It was meant to cleanse her public image. She'd branded it as a night of renewal, a way to show her devotion to charity and family. Her invitations carried quotes about forgiveness and redemption, her smiling face plastered beside them. Amy arrived in a white gown that caught the light like quiet fire. She didn't smile for the photographers. She walked the red carpet like someone walking to war, elegant, unshaken, unreadable. Inside, the theater glowed with soft golds and silvers. Journalists mingled with investors. Every lens pointed at the stage, where Margaret would soon deliver her speech. When Margaret finally appeared, she beamed at the audience, her pearls gleaming, her voice honeyed. "Tonight," she began, "is about grace, family, and the power of second chances. I especially want to thank my dear Amy for being here. Forgiveness," she said, glancing at Amy, "is the highest form of growth." The room filled with applause. Amy stood slowly, took the microphone from the host, and faced the crowd. Her voice was steady, clear, and cutting. "Thank you, Margaret, for your words about forgiveness," she said. "Since we're talking about growth, I'd like to share something with everyone tonight." She turned to the sound technician and gave a small nod. The lights dimmed, and the giant screens behind her flickered to life. A video began to play, grainy, hidden camera footage. In it, Margaret Caldwell sat at her office desk, younger but unmistakable. "I don't want that woman anywhere near the child again. Make it permanent if you have to. I'll sign whatever's needed. Margaret's voice echoed across the hall. And if she asks about her real mother, a man's voice asked off-screen. Lie. Say she's dead, or that she abandoned her. That child is mine now. Gasps rippled through the audience. Margaret's face went pale, her lips trembling. The microphone in her hand slipped slightly. Amy waited for the silence to thicken before she spoke. That child, she said, her voice calm but full of restrained pain, was me. And the woman Margaret had institutionalized wasn't unstable. She was my mother. She was taken away because she dared to defy the wrong people. Because she was poor, unconnected, and inconvenient. The audience was in chaos now, phones raised, whispers turning into shouts. The live stream continued without pause, the video spreading across every social platform in real time. Margaret's carefully crafted image was collapsing before millions of viewers. For years, Amy continued, her eyes on the crowd. I lived believing I was unwanted, unworthy, and lucky to have been saved. But I wasn't saved. I was stolen. And tonight, the truth finally belongs to the light. She placed the microphone on the podium and walked off stage without looking back. Behind her, reporters shouted questions, and Margaret clutched her chest, frozen beneath the glare of 100 flashing cameras. By midnight, every major outlet in the country was covering the scandal. The woman who once controlled everything now faced the one thing she could never silence: truth. And Amy, though she stood alone in her apartment later that night, watching the story unfold on every screen, didn't feel vengeance. What she felt was release. A wound had closed, not perfectly, but completely. But what the world didn't see, what still lurked beneath all the noise and headlines, was the most dangerous thing of all, what hadn't been said. Because when a powerful woman like Margaret Caldwell loses control, she doesn't always fall. Sometimes she fights back. And the question wasn't whether Margaret was finished. The question was how far she was willing to go now that she had lost everything. Margaret had spent decades constructing her empire, brick by brick, lie by lie. Fear was her foundation, manipulation her method, and image her armor. Watching it all unravel live on television didn't bring her humility. It ignited something far darker. She didn't believe in remorse, never had. Guilt was for the weak. Now all she had left was venom, and she would use it. After the gala, Margaret vanished. 48 hours passed without a trace. Her mansion was empty, her staff gone, her phone disconnected. Authorities launched a manhunt. She was wanted for document forgery, obstruction of justice, and complicity in unlawful confinement. The FBI suspected she might be hiding with political allies who owed her favors. Others whispered she'd crossed the border under a new name. For 2 days, the country speculated, hunted, and replayed her downfall, but no one really knew where she was, or what she was planning next. Amy Caldwell didn't celebrate Margaret's collapse. There was no satisfaction in watching her former tormentor crumble. Instead, Amy felt an exhaustion so deep it settled in her bones. Every day was a battle between her sense of duty and her failing strength. The illness that had once whispered in the background now shouted with every breath. But Amy refused to let anyone see her weakness. To the world, she was composed, an emblem of courage and justice. Behind closed doors, she was fighting for every heartbeat. Layla became her quiet protector. She handled reporters, reorganized Amy's schedule, and filtered every call that came through. She shielded Amy from the relentless cameras waiting outside the company gates, some reporters shouting questions, others pleading for exclusives. Public opinion was divided. To some, Amy was a hero. To others, she was a traitor who had destroyed a great woman for attention. None of them saw the truth, that Amy could barely sleep, that she was losing weight rapidly, that her hair was thinning beneath the silk scarves she now wore. No one knew that each morning she woke up with blood on her pillow and pain that made her double over before she could stand. The doctors had warned her that the cancer was advancing faster than expected. But Amy had made up her mind. She would not stop, not yet. Not until Margaret faced justice in full daylight. 3 days after the gala, news broke that Margaret Caldwell had been captured. She was found at a private airstrip outside Phoenix, attempting to leave the country with forged documents. In her luggage were several luxury watches, jewelry, tens of thousands in cash, and a handwritten list of political contacts known for covering tracks. When the agents arrested her, Margaret didn't resist. Her makeup was flawless, her pearl earrings gleaming. To the swarm of cameras waiting beyond the fence, she gave only one cold statement. Everything I did was for my son. She was never worthy of him. Those words ignited a firestorm. Some condemned her as a manipulative criminal. Others, astonishingly, defended her, a mother wronged by an ungrateful generation. Talk shows debated her legacy. Pundits dissected her motives. But Amy stayed silent. She gave no interviews, issued no statements. She had said what needed to be said that night on stage. Now the law would speak for her. A week later, while prosecutors prepared charges and the media obsessed over Margaret's first court appearance, Amy took a drive alone. The autumn wind swept across the countryside as she followed a narrow road toward a charity home on the outskirts of town, the same orphanage where she'd spent her childhood. She parked outside and sat in the car for several minutes before stepping out. The building looked smaller than she remembered, worn but peaceful. Inside, the nuns greeted her with uncertainty. Some smiled with quiet sympathy, others avoided her gaze. The Mother Superior led her down a long corridor into the small chapel where Amy had spent so many nights as a girl, whispering prayers to a God she wasn't sure existed. The same wooden benches lined the walls, and sunlight still filtered through the stained glass, painting the floor with color. Amy sat in the front pew and stared at the altar. For the first time in years, she didn't pray for answers or justice. She simply breathed and listened, to the silence, to the sound of her own heart. It wasn't the silence of abandonment anymore. It was the silence of healing. As she rose to leave, one of the older nuns approached, her wrinkled hands trembling slightly as she held out an envelope. "He came a few days ago," the nun said softly. "He said he was your father. He knew you'd return." Amy froze. Her heart stuttered. She took the envelope without speaking, her fingers brushing the paper as though it might vanish if she squeezed too hard. She walked back to her car, shut the door, and sat in stillness. Then, with unsteady hands, she opened the letter. Inside was a single page, written in shaky handwriting, the kind of script that carried a lifetime of regret. At the bottom was a name she had never spoken aloud but had dreamed about since childhood. Elias Caldwell. Her father. "My daughter, if you're reading this, I may already be gone. But I'm not writing to say goodbye. I'm writing to thank you for forgiving me without words, for holding your mother even when she couldn't remember who you were, for refusing to become what the world tried to make you. There are people who move through life leaving wounds behind them. You move through life healing them, quietly, painfully, but completely. You don't even realize it, but you mend what others destroy. You heal the way only those who have truly suffered can." The letter shook in Amy Caldwell's trembling hands. She pressed it against her chest, her tears falling in silence. She didn't cry for the father she barely knew or for the time already lost. She cried for everything she had been denied, for the family that should have been, for the love that had been stolen from her, for the little girl who had grown up believing she was unworthy of being loved. That night, in the solitude of her car, she finally allowed herself to grieve. When she got home, Layla was waiting with a pot of soup and quiet concern. Amy's eyes were red, her expression hollow. "Where were you?" Layla asked softly. "At the home," Amy whispered. "He's gone." Layla didn't ask for details. She simply sat beside her, placed a gentle hand on her arm, and stayed there. No words, just presence. Because sometimes comfort wasn't about speaking, it was about not leaving. The following weeks blurred into a haze of interviews, court filings, and endless speculation. Margaret Caldwell's trial was scheduled to begin in 3 weeks, and the country couldn't get enough of the scandal. Some networks painted Margaret as a manipulative socialite. Others, unbelievably, framed her as a mother who had lost her way out of love. Amy didn't plan to attend every session. She didn't crave the spotlight or vengeance. She wanted justice to unfold quietly, through law, not spectacle. But one night changed everything. The call came close to midnight. The number was blocked. Amy hesitated before answering. "Amy, it's me," Ethan's voice stammered. He sounded desperate, broken in a way she had never heard before. "What are you doing calling me at this hour? Please, don't hang up. I didn't know who else to call. I need to see you. It's important." "What's wrong, Ethan?" "I'm outside." Before she could answer, the line went dead. Amy grabbed her robe and hurried to the front window. He was standing by his car, his figure slouched under the porch light, something bundled in his arms. She opened the door cautiously. "What are you holding?" she asked. He was trembling. "It's Miles." Amy's pulse froze. "What did you do to him?" "Nothing," he blurted, shaking his head frantically. "I swear I didn't hurt him. I wanted to take him and go somewhere far. Start over. But I couldn't. I couldn't walk away." Miles was asleep, wrapped in a small blanket. Amy's voice turned cold, steady. "Give him to me." Ethan obeyed, his hands shaking as he placed the child in her arms. "I didn't know what else to do," he whispered. "No one wants me. You hate me. My mother's in jail. My father's dead. I've got nothing left." "You chose this," Amy said flatly. "You had chances to change. You just never took them." He collapsed to his knees, his voice breaking. "I just wanted someone to look at me without disgust." Amy held Miles closer, her tone calm but cutting. "That boy doesn't need a father who's still searching for someone to fix him. He needs a mother who's finally done hiding from her pain." She closed the door, leaving him outside in the cold. It was the last time she saw him. Layla woke to the noise and rushed out, her eyes widening at the sight of Amy standing there with Miles asleep in her arms. No words were needed. She embraced them both, tears rolling down her cheeks as relief and grief tangled into one. She carried Miles to his room, tucked him under a warm blanket, and sat beside his bed until his breathing deepened. Amy stood by the window, watching the first light of dawn break across the horizon. The trial would begin that morning. But for her, Judgment Day had already come. She didn't need a courtroom to deliver it. She had already passed her own verdict on her past, her pain, and her silence. Because legal justice can punish a crime, but it can't cleanse a soul. True justice begins when someone faces the truth that once destroyed them and decides to stop the cycle. Pain can be inherited, but so can courage. And Amy was determined that courage would be the only thing she left behind. Margaret Caldwell's trial became one of the most watched in the nation. Every detail, every testimony, every piece of evidence stripped away the illusion of grace she had worn for decades. Witnesses spoke of manipulation, of falsified records, of cruelty hidden behind charity. The defense tried everything: claims of mental decline, emotional coercion, even pleas for sympathy. But the proof was undeniable. The hidden recordings, the forged adoption papers, the testimonies of those she had silenced, each one a nail in the coffin of her reputation. When the verdict was read, the courtroom was utterly still. Margaret sat motionless, her face blank, her eyes as cold as marble. Guilty on multiple counts: identity fraud, conspiracy, unlawful confinement, and abuse of power. She showed no remorse. Not a tear, not an apology. Just a faint, bitter smile. Outside, reporters swarmed to capture Amy's reaction. But she didn't speak. She simply held Miles' hand, looked toward the sky, and walked away, free, not because the system had finally punished her abuser, but because she no longer carried the weight of silence. The truth had been spoken, and for the first time in her life, Amy Caldwell could breathe. She didn't shed a single tear. Margaret Caldwell walked out of the courthouse in handcuffs, her chin raised, eyes defiant, still convinced she had done what was right. Cameras flashed from every angle, reporters shouted her name, but she didn't flinch. To her, it wasn't a defeat. It was proof that she'd been willing to sacrifice everything for what she believed was family. But no one believed her anymore. Outside, the press waited for Amy Caldwell, eager for a statement, a reaction, anything. But Amy wasn't there. She was miles away, in a quiet hospital room, hooked to a machine that hummed softly while chemotherapy dripped through her veins. Her body felt like it was burning from the inside out. Her skin pale, her eyelashes gone, her hair just a memory. Yet inside, she was lighter than she'd ever been. The cancer hadn't left, but the fear, the deep, paralyzing fear that had once ruled her, was finally gone. Years passed. 3, then 5. The city moved on, the company evolved, and Amy's name transformed from that of a victim into a symbol, a survivor, a woman who had rebuilt herself without bitterness. She didn't sell her story to tabloids or appear on television talk shows. Every word she shared, she did on her own terms, through the foundation she built with her closest friend, Layla. It was called Without Fear, and it became her life's mission. Layla became her right hand, expanding the foundation's reach across multiple states. Together, they helped women trapped in cycles of violence, manipulation, and silence. They built safe homes, funded legal aid, and created training programs so women could stand on their own. For Amy, every rescued woman was one more chapter rewritten, one more voice recovered. Her son, Miles, grew up in that environment, surrounded by warmth, honesty, and the kind of love Amy once thought didn't exist. He asked questions. She gave real answers. He watched her speak with conviction, not anger. Amy gave him the middle name Elias, in honor of the father she had found too late, but whose words had given her the courage to keep going. When Amy's mother, Teresa, passed away, her last moments were peaceful. There were small glimpses of clarity, enough for recognition, enough for forgiveness. In one of those moments, she took Amy's hand, her voice weak but full of meaning. "You were my hardest battle and my sweetest victory." Amy never forgot those words. The funeral was simple: white roses, quiet music, and a silence that carried more weight than any eulogy could. No reporters, no speeches, just peace. Ethan never returned to public life. After his arrest and the subsequent breakdown, he was admitted to a psychiatric facility. The man who had once lived on arrogance and control was now a ghost walking sterile hallways, answering to no one, responding to nothing. Staff called him by a number, not his name. When Amy was informed as part of legal protocol, she declined to visit. There was nothing left to say, but she did send a book, the only one she ever wrote. That book became a quiet revolution. It wasn't self-help. It wasn't polished or commercial. It was raw, honest, and unfiltered, Amy's true story. She named names. She exposed manipulation, fear, silence. But she didn't write it for revenge. She wrote it so others could see themselves and know that healing was possible. The first edition sold out in days. It spread across shelters, universities, and even prisons. Women sent letters, pictures, and messages from all over the country. Some wrote from hospital beds, others from courthouses before testifying against their abusers for the first time. One phrase from Amy's book became a movement, printed on shirts, murals, and tattoos across America. No blow can destroy a woman who decides to live without fear. She didn't expect the fame. She never chased it. But she accepted the responsibility. She began speaking publicly, not as a celebrity, but as a witness. She stood on stages in schools, community centers, and auditoriums, always saying the same thing before she began. "My story isn't the worst. It's just one that survived long enough to be told. But there are many who never got that chance, and that's why I keep talking." At one of those events, after the applause had faded, a woman approached her with a teenage boy by her side. His eyes were wide and clear, full of a quiet understanding that felt older than his years. The woman smiled softly. "He remembers you," she said. "You hugged him once, outside your office. He's never forgotten." The boy didn't speak. He just handed her a small notepad hanging from a cord around his neck. On it, in uneven handwriting, were 4 words. "You taught me courage." Amy's throat tightened. She knelt, hugged him gently, and whispered, "Then it was all worth it." When she stepped outside that night, the city air felt different. Cooler, softer. The same streets that once frightened her now felt familiar, even kind. Maybe they hadn't changed, maybe she had. She walked home alone, without security, without anyone watching over her. For the first time in her life, she didn't need protection. She was her own protection, and that was freedom.